and podcast, however you're listening to it. We have a very special guest with us today. Patty Height from Out of Egypt Ministries is with us, and she is sharing today what God has done in her life and how the Lord brought her to a biblical understanding of her sexuality. Patty, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much,
glad
Sally.
You're here.
I am too.
This is a great day.
I love getting to share my testimony, and I love spending time with you. So it's a win-win.
Yes, the Lord brought us together. I met you, maybe a couple months ago, maybe a few months ago.
In April, during COVID quarantine.
Yep. And we just connected. We're sisters.
Yes.
And I'm so excited to have you here today and tell your story about what God has done in your life. Tell us what has happened. You know what? Just start from the beginning, because you had said that from the time you were a young child, your sexual identity, where you were at with that, and how God has brought you into, like I said earlier, this biblical understanding of your sexuality.
Well, when you said the beginning, I thought you meant Adam and Eve, and I'm like, we're going to be here for a while.
Not their beginning, your beginning.
My beginning. Gotcha. So my beginning was one of those stories that you might be hearing now of children that don't quite understand their own sexuality, their own gender. Gender wasn't a word that was commonly used when I was little, and not understanding why my brain and my body were saying something different. I don't mind giving my age away. I use it for my testimony. I was born in 1966, and so you don't have to do the math. That makes me 54 years old. And so back during, I will say, the 60s, because I was 4 years old, 3 and 4 years old going into 1970, and I had already had gender confusion at that point, but I didn't understand it was gender confusion, right? We don't have language when we're children to put to words what it is that we're experiencing, and we really don't even have the cognitive ability to understand what it is we're feeling. So sometimes we just mimic things out, right? And so for me, the way I mimicked what my brain was telling me was mimicking what all the boys in my neighborhood were doing. Now, I wasn't doing it because I wanted to be like them and mimicking them so that I could more be like a boy. I literally felt like a boy in every single aspect.
You thought like them.
Thought like them, played like them. I don't want to give a little TMI, too much information, but I think it's vital to understand, and especially in the Christian community, sometimes we pull away from things that might seem awkward to talk about, and therefore we're left behind, not understanding what's happening.
Well, you can talk about it here.
Praise the Lord. Thank you, Sally. And so for me, one thing that was really a struggle for me was going to the bathroom. I really wanted to go to the bathroom like the boys did, and I couldn't do that inside, so I would go outside. A very woodsy area that I lived in, so it was no problem.
Well, and that's an understanding. You felt like a boy. You enjoyed playing with the boys. You were one of the boys. And so at that age, you're like, well, I should be able to function.
Exactly. And then when it didn't function the properly, because our female bodies weren't created for that, it was very messy and frustrating. And so that triggered me later in life as a teenage girl, or even as an adult woman, the desire still to have that, but knowing that I couldn't was a big trigger for me. And for those who might be a trans men or trans masculine, which means a female transitioning or identifying in the masculine or as a man, one of their triggers can be using the bathroom, not just for what the sign says on the bathroom door, but the actual. And so don't know why I went off on that, but someone needed to hear that. We have to be very mindful
because
that
it's part of identifying that a lot of people don't think about. They don't think about that aspect and how that can be a trigger and an emotional hardship, for lack of a better word that I can think of right now, for someone who's in that place.
Absolutely.
Because it's such a helpless feeling. Like, this is how I should be able to function, but it is physically impossible for me. And how do you get there? I mean, a lot of people that feel hopeless in other areas of life, like, this is my reality, but this is what it should be. And it becomes not only a trigger, but anxiety, which is
So
one
distressful.
of the top medical issues in the world right now, are depression and anxiety. And it creates such a hopelessness because it's impossible. It's impossible for me to do what in your mind you're thinking I'm supposed to be or do.
Right.
So I think it's important that came up.
Well, good. We know that the Lord is, we prayed
Absolutely.
and the Lord is leading and guiding this. And so also too, so that you understand as a listener, that it's not just about sexual engagement or sexual promiscuity or sexual desires. Right. It goes so much deeper than that, as well as it's not always somebody wanting just to fold their arms and say, I'm going to use the bathroom that I want to use and you can't tell me no. It started for me when I was 5 years old, maybe even earlier than that, but my memory doesn't go back before that. So that was me.
Oh, lost your mic.
Excuse me.
Hold that up. So it began, and that's important for people to understand too, is this didn't just start because you were influenced by peers or anything. This started almost as a toddler.
In my own home, in my own thoughts, and in my own body.
Right.
And so I was that gender confused child and didn't understand. I had the ability to do everything physically, athletically that the boys did. Literally, I was the first in our county to play baseball and all these other accolades that I was getting as that athlete. But then as I got older and entered into, like when I was 12 years old, I couldn't play, I was too old to play Little League. And so the next step is Babe Ruth, but they wouldn't let me play Babe Ruth because it was much older boys. And so I had to transition into girls softball, which was so incredibly upsetting to me. It made me angry because...
Now, was this at the same time that you were beginning to go through adolescence?
Yes.
That major transition?
Adolescence, yes. I don't fully remember when I entered into puberty because unfortunately there was I have a sexual abuse history. And so that has taken a lot of my memories away of like when I started entering into the femininity, which...
So how did that impact you though, that you're identifying in your mind as one of the boys and all of a sudden adolescence hits and your body begins to develop and it's not a boy? What did that impact you?
It did, but not as difficult, not as intense maybe as some other people have experienced. Because I was an athlete and because I was so thin, I didn't really develop in my chest area much. And my female cycles at that point were a little milder. But then as I got older and started growing into this female body in my 20s, then it became very dysphoric over my body. And when those cycles would come, it was very troubling, and I just wanted to just mar my body any way I could, which is something I was used to because I started self-injury when I was 5 years old. Because
Wow,
I had this body that I loved because it gave me this amazing physical and athletic ability to do all the things that I ever wanted to do, that was allowed to do as a girl. But I hated it because the older I got, when I looked at it, it did indicate female and femininity, even though, very flat-chested. One of my many nicknames growing up was Great American Flatlands. Tapeworm, because I ate and ate and ate and never gained a pound, and I wanted to gain weight because I wanted to fill out like the boys were starting to fill out in my arms and my back, not anywhere else. I really didn't have hips or anything, so because of my the way I carried myself, my athletic body, and just the way I looked, mostly carrying myself, I also was called names like, lesbo and different things like that. And I was called that even before I realized what it was, before I even realized I was attracted to girls, which that came when the puberty came and the hormones started coming into my body. And we all enter into attractions to someone. I was attracted to girls, and again, I became very upset by that. I was scared. I was scared that I was in the wrong, or seemed as if I was in the wrong body. And I was scared that I was attracted to girls, because by that point I knew it was a girl's body, and girls liking girls was just wrong. I didn't go to church. It wasn't some pastor telling me that. It wasn't society telling me that, because society didn't talk about it then, especially in the little small town that I grew up in. It was the soul within me. It was my own emotions, my own heart telling me this isn't right. And I fought against it as long as I could. I even fought against it by getting married. And then eventually I just couldn't do it anymore, and divorced and came out.
Now, how long were you married before you divorced?
I was married for 7 years, because when I do something, I do it,
Right.
But
you were committed to it until
you
it just wasn't going to happen for you.
No, and it was an abusive relationship. He was much older than me, enough, right? Because I was just turned 18 years old when I met him, and he was 27 years old, just released from prison. No job, living with his grandmother, and just because he was actually the only person that really ever paid me any attention, I was drawn to that. I wasn't necessarily drawn to him, but I was drawn to that. Wow, he's paying attention to me in a way that nobody else has. Because everyone prior to that in my life that was a man, had either abused me or used my body for the drugs that they had that I wanted. So I started drinking and doing drugs at 12 years old. Yeah. So by the time I was 14, I was already a drug addicted alcoholic and no job. And the only way I could get the drugs and the alcohol that I wanted was going to parties with much older people. And the men there that were in their 20s and 30s had the drugs and alcohol, and it was,
you had what they wanted, and they had what you wanted.
Yeah, and so through my whole life, in the physical and the sexual sense of being touched, was never the right way. I never got touched the right way. I had a mom that never hugged me or held me or brushed my hair. I'm not throwing my mom under the bus. I don't ever want to throw parents under the bus. Right. It's just my story, and I can't get away from it. Right. It's my story.
Well, and there's not a parent alive that has not failed to live up to perfection, because there's no such thing. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. And it is part of your story. And I think that because I tread lightly in that area too, of wanting to always honor my father and mother, and that we should. I think it's so important. But also, other moms and dads that are listening can learn. Young parents can learn, this is what my child needs. She didn't get this. I hadn't thought of that before. So it's important that we tell those aspects of our story in understanding that parents, I believe, as a parent, they're doing the best they know how. They're not deliberately waking up in the morning and saying, how can I hurt my child?
No.
They're not. The parent, that's not a parent's heart. I think even the hardest of hearts doesn't think like that.
And many parents are wounded themselves.
Right. And I think that's important to talk about too, because there are a lot of parents out there that are hurting and grieving and thinking, this is all my fault, what my child is living in, this is all my fault. And it helps to know that sometimes you can do everything right and it can turn out wrong. You can do everything wrong and it can still turn out right. We do our best, but at the end of the day, there are still things that are bigger than us that we can't control as parents. And so I appreciate your sensitivity as a parent. I appreciate your sensitivity, but it's part of the story. And sometimes we need to hear the painful truth as parents to help us grow and help us to be better. And so you didn't get the affection you needed, which is very common, especially back then. I don't know today. My kids are grown now, but back then affection wasn't really shown or expressed a lot of times with parents. So you didn't get any example, for the most part, a real formative example of proper affection and love, especially godly affection and love from your home. And then, of course, the world had its own version of abuse called love. It's really abuse.
As did my marriage, which was part of that worldly abusive love. It's a storge love, a consuming love, not an agape love that we get from the Lord.
Right.
But if I can just interject for 1 second,
Sure.
parents and church, even for people coming into the church, touch is so important. Everyone wants to be touched.
Yes.
A gentle hand on a hand, a touch on the shoulder, a godly arm around, the top of the back that little thing can heal so much hurt and damage from lack of touch or improper touch that people have experienced. And so I know sometimes it's hard to touch children who are just like, trying to push their parents away, but just if you can, just get a simple something in, and they will understand the comforting touch of a parent, and pray and ask the Lord to show you how to do that. And even in the church, when you have people coming out of a living a life of pain, whatever that life might be, drugs, alcohol, sexual issues, whatever it is, and they come into the church, don't be afraid to touch them. Men, don't be afraid to put your arm around a guy that's maybe more effeminate than you're used to, or ladies, a woman that you might think might be carrying herself in a masculine way. When you hug her, it's okay. Hold her for a second. A man, when you put your arm around a guy, it's okay. It's not going to make them think that you want them in any way. It's going to be a comforting touch that maybe they haven't experienced in a long time.
Like you mentioned, an agape love, a love that is pure, that it does not have any sexual deviance to it whatsoever, or motive, or ulterior motive, but just that brotherly or sisterly love, that hug that says, you know what, man, you're valuable.
Yes.
And you are loved for who you are, and I want you to know it. And I want to affirm that.
Yes.
The touch is an affirmation of, saying, you know what, I'm on your side here. I'm with you.
And I don't think you have leprosy.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to catch the gay from you.
Right. So speaking of that, then you divorced your husband and went in from there into same-sex relationships. And there's one of our phones. It's mine. It usually is. So I can't ever turn this thing off. That we were talking earlier about how technologically challenged I am. I apologize for that. So getting back on this, you had said how after your marriage ended, then...
That's when I fully came out. I moved out of the state that I was in and had a whole new life, a whole new career that was an exciting career working for the airlines. And it felt very safe at that point to come out. I couldn't stuff it anymore. My body was screaming to do and be what it wanted to be. And so I fully came out. And when I first came out, I identified as a lesbian. And then as I became more comfortable as part of the LGBT community and was lifted up by them, I didn't like the lesbian title because it indicated feminine or a woman. And so I just started identifying as gay. And I didn't put a label on my gender, but in my own heart of hearts, I was what we would call now non-binary or gender non-conformed, leaning toward the masculine. I no longer wore any female clothing, not underclothing, outer clothing, watches, glasses, cologne, shoes. Nothing was from the women's department, and so I liked the way that felt on my body.
Did you sense? Did you have a sense of, I'm finally free?
I did.
That because a lot of people express that when they finally come out into a same-sex identity, sexual identity, or same-sex relationship, that there is this, like the scripture talks about sin being pleasurable for a season. It's like there is this season where you just feel this euphoric, I'm free, I'm finally living who I am.
It was very euphoric. As I share, when I travel and share throughout the country, I tell people that's when I felt freedom for the first time in my life. I was free to do anything I wanted to. I was free to let these pushed down, very real feelings that I was experiencing out. And so that's where the freedom came from. But what we have to understand is just because we feel free doesn't mean we are free. Deception will bring the very thing that we think we need, and then it takes us on this travel journey of deception, and it takes us farther than we ever thought we were going to go. But we think it's the very place that we will find that utopia, you know, and that's what it was for me. And I lived high off the hog for a while. I felt I was very lonely in my life prior to coming out. And when I entered into my identity and the LGBT community, which is fantastic at embracing people, I became popular for the first time in my life. I got all the girls that I wanted. I was going to the biggest, best clubs in the state that I lived in, getting attention, and that felt really, really good. So just as like I tried to enter into a marriage to get attention that way, which failed, now I'm entering into this new community, this new family, getting an identity and being built up in a way that I never had before, and it seemed like it wasn't failing. But what I didn't know is that it was failing the real me that I had hidden and buried inside of me. The real me I hid away the first time the abuse started, because that I had to do that to keep myself safe. And you know, I think God allows that sometime because if things are really bad, physically, emotionally, or sexually through abuse. There's a way of escape to keep us safe in the emotional until we are older and the abuse, or however the abuse stops, whatever age. And then
you had gone there to survive.
I did.
But you hear that so common among survivors of sexual abuse, and that was buried. That real Patty, that young girl, got buried.
I think, well, we could say in a sense, I transitioned at a very young age. I think I transitioned into a typical tomboy girl that would have gone through puberty and probably grown into the woman that I would have desired to be. But instead of it going in the direction where, you know,
you developed into that person.
I developed a male identity in a sense.
Right, because you had lived with this male identity, and then that's very common that when people are struggling, whether it's boys with femininity or even just being bullied or being neglected by a father figure in their lives, then that lack, where it's lacking, then when you reach adolescence, that becomes eroticized.
Absolutely.
The sexual confusion. And then you look to that same sex as that's what, there's something inside of you that knows that's what you're supposed to be and what you desire, you want to be. But since you can't be it, then you'll be with it. Am I right in saying that? And that maybe you'll find completion by being with someone who is that missing, that's missing in you. And I think about that scripture in Proverbs that says, you know, there's a way that seems right to man, in woman, but the end thereof leads to destruction. And when we're left to our own, trying to find our way, or culture is trying to tell us the way to go, it can seem like the right path, but it's destruction.
It is, and you don't realize it's destruction because it's so invigorating to the person experiencing it. And so that was my story, and I wanted to hide what I didn't understand. This is what was happening when I was little, but now looking back as the Lord has led me through healing, once I started identifying more masculine in the masculine, even though I never changed my name or started taking testosterone or wanted to change my pronouns, because again, we just didn't do that back then, at least like now. I wore the baggy clothes, the men's clothing, because I wanted to hide my body. I never wanted anyone to see this female body and slightly female figure that I had then. I didn't want them to see that because to me, that meant if they saw that, they were coming after it.
Right.
And so too, and it's very different for men and women. And so for those young boys that might be the musicians or very articulate, they might use 20 words to describe something instead of 5 words that maybe some other boys will, and so they get picked on for that. And so if they wouldn't get picked on or bullied or rejected or inappropriately touched themselves, they would have grown up to be an articulate man that wasn't, Arnold Schwarzenegger, but instead they ventured into a different direction. Now, coming into a gay identity because, well, if that's what everyone says I am, then I must be.
Right. And this is something we are going to do 2 parts to this program. And this first half, I want to say, is a setup. It lays the groundwork for what happened when Patty encountered a supernatural transformation from every part of her, body, mind, and spirit, a complete transformation when she encountered God, her creator, the one who created her body, mind, and spirit. And we want you to join us for part 2, and we want you to be encouraged today that knowing no matter where you are at in life, no matter where you're at in your sexuality or in your spirituality or in just any other circumstance in your life, you may be feeling hopeless, you may be feeling afraid, you may be feeling depression and anxiety and just the hopelessness and frustration in your situation. I want to encourage you today to join us for part 2 because you are going to be blown away at what we have to tell you and how God can intervene in any situation, any place of hopelessness, of frustration, or just emptiness. You're just feeling that you're not fulfilled, completely walking in who you were supposed to be as a person and in your life. God has an incredible plan for your life, and you're going to hear about it in the next program. So join us for part 2, and we will see you there. God bless you.
God bless you.